checking on the combine, who scored well. Now, we know that Eagles fans are all checking in on these wide receivers, right?
That's it. That's
if
where
there's
the
not
focus.
another position in the draft.
There's not. It's only wide receivers this year in Philadelphia. That is it.
Well, let's check in with Scott Wright from DraftCountdown.com to get a couple thoughts on the NFL Combine, some of the results down there, and what did we learn? You know, Scott, it seems to be that time of the year where there's 50 first-round picks, but there's not 50 spots, is there?
No, it's pretty impressive depth, and certainly it's some positions more than others, especially wide receiver, as you mentioned. It's just, I've been saying all along, you're going to be able to get a second-round receiver in the fourth or fifth round.
Well, let's look at the wide receiver spot because a lot of Eagle fans are wondering, all right, what about us? They're at 21, and then the receivers ran this weekend, and that changes a lot of the complexion of this game. How many first-round receivers do you think will go off the board?
Well, that's a good question. I think there's a clear-cut top tier with Jerry Jeudy and Henry Ruggs of Alabama and CeeDee Lamb of Oklahoma, and they might all be off the board in the top 15 overall. And I kind of wonder if teams might wait to take advantage of the depth after that. I know if I were running a team and I could get one of those top three, I'd rather wait because I think that sweet spot for wide receiver values would be rounds 3, 4, 5. I don't know if Justin Jefferson from LSU certainly had a very good workout in Indy at the Combine. He ran a lot better than expected, and that put him in the first round. But I'm not so sure you can't get a similar talent at a fraction of the cost a little bit later on. But I think he's certainly going to be in the conversation. Maybe Brandon Ayuk from Arizona State. I think Laviska Shenault from Colorado is going to drop a little bit, partly because of injury concerns. But one interesting guy that I think could be in play for Philly, who people aren't really talking about, is KJ Hamler from Penn State, who's not very big. He's only about 5'8", 175 pounds, but really fast. And Marquise Brown could go in the early 20s last year. I think Hamler could this year. So that's a name that people aren't really talking about in that first-round conversation, who I think could be a fit for Philly. But, the best fit for what the Eagles need is Henry Ruggs. He provides that speed and explosiveness to stretch the field that they are desperately seeking on offense. The problem is they're going to have to move up from 21 to get him, but that's not unheard of. They moved up Carson Wentz. They moved up last year for Andre Dillard. So they've shown a willingness to be aggressive in round one to get the guy they want, and Ruggs would be such a perfect fit. I wouldn't be shocked to see them explore moving up into the top 15 to see if they could get him.
Yeah, his name has been mentioned a lot, but he might have run himself out of that area because it seemed like he may have been around there, but has he kind of did this weekend move him out of the 20s?
I think he was out of there beforehand, honestly. Even before I went down to the Senior Bowl in mid-January or the end of January, I had him going 15 to the Broncos. And I think you can make an argument for him over Jerry Jeudy or CeeDee Lamb. Speed kills. And Henry Ruggs, just put in perspective how fast he is at 5'11", 188 pounds, he ran a 4.27, and that was considered disappointing because he didn't break the all-time record. He was disappointing with a 4.27. So just absolutely world-class speed and not a finesse receiver either. He's not one of these guys who's a one-trick pony and is kind of a track star playing football. He's a football player. He'll go across the middle. He'll do the little things. He plays special teams. So Henry Ruggs, I'm a big fan of his, as you can probably tell. And I won't be shocked if he came off the board ahead of Jeudy or Lamb on draft day.
Scott, what's an underrated evaluating tool in these players? The Combine, some people call it the underwear Olympics, and it's overrated. And, they're talking about Joe Burrow's hand size. But I think there's clearly and obviously a skill to evaluating talent and possibly finding a hidden gem. So not the 40-yard dash, not the bench press. What's a unique way that teams find someone under the radar that can be it?
Yeah, and it can vary by position, but as a whole, I think everyone kind of focuses on the things you can quantitate, the 40-yard dash, the reps, the broad jump, the vertical jump. But one thing that I always find really valuable in the positional drills is seeing these defensive linemen who might be converting to outside linebacker do the linebacker drills to see how well they move in space, to see if they can backpedal and handle themselves in reverse. I think that's really valuable. So that's one that definitely kind of stands out to me. But each position has something different. And as we always talk about too, so much focus is on the on-field stuff, but the interviews with teams are far more important when push comes to shove. With all the stuff that's happened in Indianapolis, and some guys really needed to do well in those regards. You think of Tua Tagovailoa from Alabama, reportedly received really good news on his medicals. He's going to be able to work out for teams before the draft, I believe April 9th. So that's a huge plus for him. And then some guys have some off-the-field concerns that they needed to answer for and maybe answer some questions and alleviate concerns. So off-the-field stuff is very important. But in terms of on the field, I like to see the guys do the position-specific drills and kind of see them do the things you're going to be asking them to do at the next level.
Yeah, a couple guys that I'm interested to get your take on. The Eagles are at 21, and you mentioned a bunch of receivers. Do you have a couple guys that you think will be in that 21 area that the listeners can kind of keep their eye on as we get closer to the draft and obviously after this weekend? Who has put themselves in that area?
Well, I definitely think Justin Jefferson, who I mentioned, he ran a 4.4s, which is better than expected. He's just a really polished wide receiver, guy who does all the little things. You hear comparisons to a Keenan Allen type of player who can work all the slots and rack up a lot of production there. I mentioned KJ Hamler from Penn State. Another name who I think could be a fit for the Eagles maybe is Brandon Isiah from Arizona State. He only ran a 4.50, but he plays faster than that, and just a real dynamo after the catch, can really create in the open field. He's also a really good return man. So I think that's the type of player that the Eagles are looking for, more so than, say, T. Higgins from Clemson, who I really like. He's a good player, but he's more of a tall, downfield jump ball guy, and I think Philly has some guys along those lines. They need that speed, explosiveness, and playmaking ability. So Jefferson, I don't know how much of that he provides, but Hamler and Aiyuk, I think, would be really good fits. It might be a little early for them, and honestly, I would wait if I were Philly. I really would. And I'd come back and I'd get a couple receivers maybe in rounds 3 through 5, depending on what they're looking for. Jaylen Rhaegar from TCU is a guy who could be there in round 2, could be interesting. KJ Hill from Ohio State didn't run particularly well, but he's probably going to be available in round 4 or 5. It just go on and on. It's, no matter what type of receiver you're looking for, there's going to be options available in every single round.
What do you make of Claypool from Notre Dame, who ran pretty well, physically, a big guy? So I'm sure that, especially, you see him getting the Megatron comparisons. I'm sure that's going to elevate his status. Does he deserve that?
I believe he does. He's been one of my personal favorite players throughout this process, and I've actually had him as my number 1 senior wide receiver since early in the fall. And we knew he was tall. He's 6'4.25", came in even heavier at the combine than he was at the Senior Bowl. He weighed in at 238 pounds. And I heard all this talk, even going back to Mobile, about moving him to tight end. And I just didn't see it. I said, he's going to run a lot better than people expect. He's a wide receiver, and sure enough, he ran a 4.42 at 238 pounds. Now, that's not to say he can't play tight end, but I don't think he has to. I think he's an excellent wide receiver, and the only reason he wasn't more productive is the quarterback at Notre Dame left a lot of production on the field with his inability to get Claypool the ball. So I think Claypool is clearly a better prospect than Miles Boykin, who went in the 3rd round a year ago. And if Claypool is available anywhere outside the top 2 rounds, I think he's going to be a steal for someone. And there's a chance he could be with the depth in this class, but he would absolutely be a guy I'd be targeting on day 2. I'd rather have Chase Claypool in the 2nd or 3rd round than take one of the second tier of guys that we talked about late in the 1st.
Yeah, and, he seemed to be one of the big names. You mentioned Ruggs, Jefferson. I think he's a guy that Eagle fans probably should keep an eye on. Were there any of the receivers who had a weekend that maybe hurt their opportunities, in that 1st, 2nd round area?
Yeah, there was a handful.
I think we lost Scott.
Yeah.
He just kind of vanished from us, and there he went.
There he went. He didn't like that question.
Man, no, I think he was ready to give us some guys who kind of fell off there.
Or there was too many.
And there's some guys like Tyler Johnson didn't run.
Yeah.
KJ Hill, who he mentioned, he said didn't run very well.
Yep.
So we'll see. I'm interested in seeing his take on that. And also, obviously everybody was talking about Simmons this weekend on the defensive side of the ball.
I wanted to ask him about him, yeah.
Yeah, we will get into that with him in just a second. He just kind of vanished away in mid-sentence, but we'll bring him back in to the conversation. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Follow him at draftcountdown. All right, so, yeah, we were talking about some guys at wide receiver that did not have – because it seemed like everybody was talking about the wideouts, how great everybody ran this weekend, but there had to be a couple of guys that maybe fell a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one, Laviska Shenault from Colorado, it's not that he did terrible. He still ran the 4.58 range, but there's talk that, well, he's not completely healthy. But that's a good excuse. But the problem is that's one of the concerns with him is the health and the durability. He's been nicked up a lot. And there's some really impressive film on him, but I thought even during the season that he was going to slide a little bit. I think this just adds more evidence to that. So some people think he's an early first-round talent. I don't think he's going to be a first-round pick. KJ Hill from Ohio State only ran a 4.60, which isn't a great time for a little bit of a smaller receiver, and that could drop him into day 3. Then a couple of day 3 picks. Jajuan Jennings from Tennessee, who wasn't expected to run particularly well, but only ran a 4.72. He's kind of an Anquan Bolden type of player, though, where he's really physical, Jarvis Landry type of player. So the speed's not necessarily a huge concern, but 4.72 is not a great time for a wide receiver. And then Quintez Cephas from Wisconsin, who was dominant at times in college, but had some pretty serious off-the-field concerns that was already going to push him well into day 3, I think. Then he ran a 4.73. So I think Cephas is the guy who probably hurt himself the most between that time, which was far slower than expected, and then the off-the-field things that are going to lead to teams just taking him off their board completely. So those are some of the receivers that I think hurt themselves. And then I think Trey Adams from Washington is the guy that the offensive tackle from Washington, who a couple years ago it looked like he might be an early first-round pick, but missed a couple of seasons with injuries, tested really poor, near the bottom of of pretty much every category for the offensive lineman. And some people are still talking about him as a day 2 pick, but I think he's going to be available well into day 3 due to those medical concerns.
The defensive back spot, the corners and safeties, how do you see the depth in this year's class?
Some disappointing results for the cornerbacks. Jeff Okudah from Ohio State was the exception. He's the clear-cut top cover guy in this draft, and he certainly lived up to all those expectations. That's 6'1", 200 pounds. He ran a 4.48. He jumped out of the gym. I think C.J. Henderson from Florida kind of solidified himself as the number 2 cover guy in this draft. But some of those guys, I think on day 2, day 3, didn't run quite as well as expected. And honestly, that's one position where as I'm going through and I'm getting ready to kind of tweak my rankings to factor in everything that happened in Indy, I'm kind of struggling with. I think there's a mix of 4 or 5 guys that are battling to be cornerback 3, 4, 5, 6. But I think it might end up not being a clear-cut answer. It might vary depending on what type of player team they're looking for. I'm personally a big fan of Trayvon Diggs from Alabama. Reminds me very much of Marlon Humphrey when he was coming out of that same program. Really big, athletic, outstanding ball skills. The question for him is the pure speed, and he didn't run in Indy, so we'll have to wait a little bit on that. Christian Fulton from LSU ran a 4.46 at almost 6 foot, 200 pounds. A really good time for him, and might have kept himself right in that late first-round mix, and could be a possibility for Philly at 21 if they decide to go for a cornerback. And then one guy that people haven't really been talking about too much that I think kind of reasserted himself into the conversation as one of those top second-tier corners is A.J. Terrell from Clemson, who at 6'1", 195, he ran a 4.42, and really good pedigree coming from that Clemson program. They've been producing good cover guys for a number of years now, and I wouldn't be surprised if he snuck into that back end of the round 1.
Speaking of Clemson, Isiah Simmons here, linebacker, ran a 4.39. It seems like he's getting a lot of publicity here from his weekend at the Combine, and he's talked about as someone that could play multiple positions and just a great athlete. Talk about his Combine and what you expect him to do here in the draft.
A very unique prospect, and you mentioned he blew it up with his workouts, 6'3.5", almost 240 pounds. He ran a 4.39. He had a 39-inch vertical, just incredible workouts, and he was expected to do that. But the versatility is his number 1 calling card. This past season for Clemson, he played outside linebacker, inside linebacker, safety, outside cornerback, nickel cornerback, and he also rushed off the edge and had 7 sacks. I mean, talk about a guy who can absolutely do it all, and he's going to go in the top 10, maybe as early as 4 to the New York Giants, although I'm not sure how great of a fit he is there, even though they have a need at that position. It's just unlike that organization to take that type of player that early. But I think the Arizona Cardinals at 8 could be a good fit. The Jaguars at 9. But honestly, if it were me running a team, I'd wait. I'd wait to and address a different position, whether it be a quarterback, offensive lineman, cover guy, pass rusher in the first round, and try to get maybe a poor man's version of Isaiah Simmons later on. And the guy I'd be targeting is Jeremy Chin from Southern Illinois, another guy who had an incredible workout. 6'3", 221, ran a 4.45, 41-inch vertical. Somewhat comparable numbers to Isaiah Simmons, even though he's about 20 pounds lighter. And he's not the prospect that Simmons is, which is why he's going to be available later, but he can give you a lot of that same versatility where he can play safety, he can play a little corner. I remember watching him down in Mobile at the Senior Bowl in the practices, running downfield step for step with a really good crop of wide receivers. He comes down in the box and he'll hit. He's a playmaker, really good ball production. So if I were a team, I'd hold off on Isaiah Simmons, let somebody else take that quote-unquote non-premium position in that top 10 and come back and get a guy like Jeremy Chin or even Akeem Davis-Gaither from Appalachian State, who I think could give you some of those same things a little later on.
Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Now, going into the Combine, your rankings at Burrow, Tua, Herbert, Love, has that changed following Indianapolis?
Not for me, it hasn't changed, but for some it might have. There's some who prefer Love to Herbert, and I think that's one of the big storylines coming out of Indy is just how highly regarded Jordan Love from Utah State is around the league, and there's talk that he could go as early as maybe 6 overall to the Chargers, but then it's kind of tough to find a spot because I'm beginning to work on my next mock draft, and this game of quarterback musical chairs has everything kind of in flux. Right now, you can say, well, maybe the Raiders at 12, maybe the Colts at 13, maybe the Buccaneers at 14. But we have to figure out where's Tom Brady going, where's Phillip Rivers going, where's Teddy Bridgewater going, etc. So I think there's going to be a much more clear fit for Jordan Love in 2-3 weeks here. But as of right now, I think he's going somewhere in that top 15. It's just a matter of finding exactly where he's going to end up. But a very toolsy quarterback, and if you go watch his 2018 tape, he was incredible. Took a step backwards in 2019 because he lost so much talent around him, new coaching staff, new offensive coordinator. But even so, even when he was struggling, there were still some absolute wow moments. And I said down the Senior Bowl, I'm not comparing him to Patrick Mahomes in by any stretch of the imagination, but there are some of those Patrick Mahomes moments where you just say, wow, how did he do that? So Jordan Love, you can see why teams fall in love with him, and he's going to be a little bit of a project, and ideally he could sit and learn for a year. So maybe that's a case where wherever Phillip Rivers ends up, whether it's Indianapolis or Tampa Bay, maybe they take Jordan Love as the heir apparent in a year or two.
First running back taken will be and when?
I think it's going to be DeAndre Swift from Georgia still. Had a solid, somewhat unspectacular workout. He ran a 4.48 at 5'8", 212 pounds. Certainly the program pedigree. I mean, you can go back literally 20, 30 years and talk about the great running backs that the Georgia program has sent to the next level right up to this day. And Swift ran actually better than either Nick Chubb or Sony Michel when they were coming out of college to the Combine. So I still think it's going to be DeAndre Swift. I think the logical fit for him if he goes in the first round would be the Miami Dolphins at 26, maybe the Chiefs at 31. But it wouldn't shock me if there wasn't a running back in the first round this year. But the guy who I think really kind of put himself back in that conversation to be, if not the first running back off the board, the second, is Jonathan Taylor from Wisconsin. People kind of questioned his speed, but he ran a 4.39 at 5'10" and 226 pounds. So he ran better than DeAndre Swift, who he has by about 15 pounds. I think you combine that rare size and speed along with his incredible production, he might have worked himself into the first round conversation. And if not, he's going to go early in the second round. So I think Jonathan Taylor made himself some money, especially with J.K. Dobbins opting not to work out. He's waiting for his pro day. So I think Jonathan Taylor really seized that opportunity and made a strong case for himself to be that second runner after DeAndre Swift.
I'd like to get your opinion on this. Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com, at Draft Countdown on Twitter. The XFL, do you think that players who are underclassmen will make the jump to the XFL? in the future as opposed to waiting out for the NFL, play there for a couple of years? Do you think like a guy like Trevor Lawrence, who bursts on the scene as a freshman in the future, that will start going that route?
I doubt we'll see the very top tier guys like a Trevor Lawrence, just because there's too much risk. If he were to get hurt or perform poorly, I mean, right now Trevor Lawrence is looking at making probably $500 million in the NFL by the time his career is done. So I don't think he's going to want to put that on line. But I think some of the lesser prospects, maybe guys who have academic issues and or just don't like college or have some off the field issues, that could be a option for them. And we actually have a little bit of a test case in this class who people aren't talking about. Kenny Robinson, safety, he played at West Virginia and got dismissed due to academic reasons, and he was going to transfer, but then his mom had some health concerns, and he decided to go to the XFL. And he was drafted, and he already had his first interception. He's playing for the St. Louis Battlehawks, and he's draft eligible now. He entered his name into this draft, and early as a sophomore, he looked like a top 3-round pick. So we'll see where he goes in this draft, and if this works out pretty well for him, I think it might make other players take notice and consider that as more of a viable option. But I don't see them doing what the USFL did, where they go out and get Steve Young and Herschel Walker and these huge names. There's just too much money in the future for those types of guys. But I think middling prospect, mid-round, late-round prospect, it certainly could be if the XFL proves it's going to be around for a while.
All right, last one for Scott Wright. Talent at the top of the 2020 class next to 2019. How do you match them up?
I think this class is far superior, and I actually sent out on Twitter that I think if you combine last year's class and this year's class, the only guy from last year's class that would break into the top 6 overall would be Nick Bosa. But otherwise, I think the rest would all be from this class. I think you go position by position. I think Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa would both be ahead of Kyler Murray in last year's class. And, so I think Derek Brown, the defensive tackle from Auburn, this year he might not even go in the top 5 overall. Last year, I think he's a better prospect than Quinn Williams, who went number 3 overall. So the top of this draft is really stacked. In addition to that depth that we have, there's some really good players available in the top 10, and we kind of know who the players are, honestly. We're going to see probably 3 quarterbacks go in the top 10. We're going to see Jeff Okudah from Ohio State. I think we're going to see 3 or 4 blockers. We're going to see Derek Brown, Isaiah Simmons, and that's basically the top 10. So we're talking about all these great wide receivers, Jerry Jeudy and CeeDee Lamb and Henry Ruggs. They might be available beyond the top 10 just because there's so much talent at other positions.
Scott Wright, of course, the draft is upcoming in April. We will talk to Scott throughout the process. Always great stuff. 51 days, 20 hours, 13 minutes, and 15 seconds currently until the first pick of the NFL draft. He's Scott Wright, draftcountdown.com. Thanks, Scott.
My pleasure. Anytime.
Yeah, man. And he, like all guests, appeared via the Boardwalk Honda hotline.